So I'm going to talk to you about today on the Galapagos Islands, but the theme of sustainability and sustainable development is key aspects of it. Briefly commenting on those terms, then we're going to pass on to the Galapagos context. Then as next part of the talk, walking through the steps or the efforts towards sustainable Galapagos, and then share with you the research that I started with the help of with some students that I see here accompanying us today on the sustainability of the island of Floriana, and end up with final remarks. So we have to depart with a premise, and this is universal, must be universal. Healthy ecosystem and environments are needed to the survival of us all, humans and also all living creatures that exist on the planet. So with that premise, we jump on the term of sustainability, which is a combined word that if we go to the Latin and what derives from the Latin sustinere, sustain, support, endure, and ability from Latin abilis, which means, apt, being able to be skillful. We summarize it as being able to maintain, whatever that is. That's sustainability. And the term was initially used in fisheries, what I've picked up from the literature. Basically, the property of the biological systems to remain diverse and productive indefinitely. So in the fishing industry, they really wanted to be sustainable to have the stocks of fish for the future. So entering into sustainable development, the term was used initially in 1987 during the Brundtland Commission, and I think that was Stockholm, if I'm not wrong, but the emphasis was in development that meets the needs of the present without comprising the ability of the future generation. So the intergenerational aspect is mentioned in this definition. Later on, and I like this definition from Herman Daly, defines sustainability or sustainable development as development without growth beyond environmental limits. So he brings in the environmental limits into the equation. And one that I have recently picked up, which is related to the studies, the academic, the science, he refers as an analytical field of study that aims to explain and predict the complexity of the social environmental systems that govern us all. So, in the end, I think we come up with a simple graph that most of us have seen it around, and that tries to interpret that there's a need to have a balance between the social, the environmental, and the economic aspects as pillars of sustainability. But having a look at the term sustainability and sustainable development, I found that there are elements that coincide, that they share. They seek to prosper or do well economically and socially, with the intergenerational aspect, which is for the present and the future generations, and conserving the Earth's life support systems, nature, environment that feed us all. So with this brief introduction, then we jump into our case study, the Galapagos Islands. So where are the Galapagos Islands compared to where we are now? It's over 4,000 kilometers away, but they are islands that are off the coast of Ecuador, about 600 miles off the coast, And it's an archipelago that is composed by 13 major islands and more than 100 rocks and islets, with 4 inhabited islands: San Cristobal, Santa Cruz, Isabela, and Floriana. 97% of the landmass of the islands is national park, and surrounded by 138,000 square kilometers of protected area as a marine reserve. The population of Galapagos, the human population, is about 33,000 people distributed on these 4 islands that I just mentioned. Now, Galapagos is a place that is in constant formation. At least the ones that we have, the islands we have today, they appeared 3 to 5 million years ago. We had the last eruption last year, lasted 3 months, Volcano Isabella. And it's a unique place because I haven't really found more literature about a place that had the influence of so many ocean currents at the same time. Stronger or weaker depending on the season, but they are there, present, bringing lots of influences to the terrestrial area, special habitats and ecosystems that marine and terrestrial that have definitely been essential for the creation or the evolution of many species, and most of them are endemic. Marine birds are endemic to the islands. We have few species: cormorants, albatrosses. We have penguins right there on the equator. Patches of coral as well, and reptiles like the famous giant tortoise. All the reptiles are endemic, with some few introduced ones. And birds, land birds, like the mockingbirds and the Darwin finches that gave Darwin the inputs to develop his theory of the origin of species through natural selection. But let's don't forget the marine environment, where we do have species that are essential for the health of the marine life in the region, but also important for fisheries, local artisanal fisheries in Galapagos, like lobsters and groupers, but also important for the tourism and conservation. The other important aspect of Galapagos is the recent colonization. Pretty much Galapagos as volcanic, they never had an indigenous population of humans, like in the Micronesia, for example. They were pretty much barren, empty. So I'm going to just highlight some of the key milestones that I consider important sharing with you. That's 1832, where the Galapagos Islands really are claimed by Ecuador as part of its territory. 3 years later, the famous naturalist arrives to the islands in 1835, Charles Darwin, who really put the Galapagos out to the world because of his theory. Another important landmark is the penal colonies that were established in Galapagos, but there is one that I think it's important because it was on the island of San Cristobal in the late 1800s, and it lasted until 1903. And when that was abolished, then many people migrated to other of the islands or stayed on the island of San Cristobal. The governance structures, the institutionalization of the islands it's important as well. The institutions that landed on the island or recently colonized island. So the national park was established in 1959, and along with the Galapagos National Park came the Charles Darwin Foundation, the Charles Darwin Research Station, and the administration of the Ecuadorian Institute, the National Park. In 1973, the Galapagos Islands become a province. So geopolitically speaking, the islands before 1973 belonged politically, or the decisions were taken in the mainland, in the province of Guayas. But in 73 it became independent, and of course that introduced the recognition of 3 municipalities, and of course elections to the dignitaries started since then, and the decisions were pretty much in the hands of the locals. In 1980 is the first efforts of the Ecuadorian government under the presidency of Ecuador to bring in together those municipalities and the national institutions to sit at a table and try to convey, agree on what was the development that Galapagos would need for the future. But it was just about almost 18 years after that in many movements that were created in order to have a special law for the Galapagos Islands. The islands, fragile and unique, required a different legislation than the rest of the country. But in order to have a special law, the constitution of the country needed to be changed, because one of the articles, I think it's the 258, if I'm not wrong, said that any Ecuadorian could move freely and live freely in any part of Ecuador. And then the addition was except the Galapagos Islands. And when that took place, then the special law could have been formulated. And then with that first exercise that took years of discussions, it was pretty much finalized in 1998, restrictions to mobility and some other activities and reinforcement of conservation were put into place. And to implement that has been a long journey. So since 1998 until 2021, the sustainable development, the word sustainability, have been advancing as the time went by, and it is in 2015 where the Galapagos Sustainable Development and Good Living Plan picked up the term strongly, but it was too short of a plan. So the current one of 2021 had inserted into its planning the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals that are inserted there, and they are being used for the implementation of the plan. So now we go a bit into the deeper concepts of sustainability and how they have evolved throughout time. And it's important to notice that Galapagos is seen as a social ecological system. It's in the words of the authorities, it's in the words of most of the planners nowadays. It came out during the 2006 management plan of the Galapagos National Park, and it has been reinforced in the 2014 management plan for the protected areas of Galapagos. So we have the social system and the natural capital, both of them interacting with human actions on the natural capital that provides the ecosystem services or ecological services. But they are, of course, subject to boosters of change, indirect and direct. The indirect at the local, national, and international, associated pretty much with the activities that the actors of the system takes place, and of course the change and the impacts on the natural system. And this concept of a social ecosystem for Galapagos that comes mainly from the planning exercises at the national park area also recommends that the inhabited islands work as a network. They should not be isolated or work on their own. They still tend to do that because they are independent local governments. So they have their own rules, they have their own council. Even though there's directions for the province, they sometimes just take their own actions. So the collaboration it's important. So we're going to go through the threats and challenges. There's many, but summarizing them. Galapagos has an annual population increase of 3.5%. It was more, but it was reduced with the law and took a bit of time. There's an increase of introduced species. As we speak, the threats are there. There's over 800 species of invasive plants. The last one and the complicated one is the Filornis fly. It's affecting the population of more than 15 land species of birds. Pressure from fisheries. They want more species, more amounts. Most of the artisanal fishing has been coastal, and the species like lobsters, newly fished sea cucumbers, groupers, and these other coastal species are going in decline, and they are asking for deep sea fishing now. Pressure to increase tour operators and visitor sites and an exploration growth of tourism has been happening since the 1960s, the late 60s, where the organized tourism in Galapagos started. And with that increment of tourists along the time, poor urban and rural planning struck the islands. The cities have grown tremendously. No planning, or the planning is there, but not really capacity to follow the plans and the rules. And the public services have paid its toll too. Public services like potable water, hospitals, education, sewage systems are very, very precarious on the islands, and the municipalities cannot cope with this alarming exponential growth of tourism and, of course, local population. There's poor funding for science and conservation, even though there's more funding for science and conservation than for urban development and environmental aspects. Still, the funding for the maintenance of the natural capital is very poor. And the other threats and challenges, of course, are related with climate change and pollution that is not only coming from the islands themselves, but from many parts of the world as well. So with these threats and challenges, a question came up in 2012 by the then president of Ecuador: how many people can Galapagos hold? Not only tourists, but also residents there. And pretty much based on the studies that had been carried out in the past with modeling on various islands, particularly in Europe, Greece, Spain, on tourism there, then the study came on board. I was director of the recently appointed as director of the Galapagos National Park for the second time, and the minister by then told me, this is what the president wants, so you take it on board. All right? So there was, so leadership and political support, it was there. The leadership by the Minister of the Ministry of Environment with the Galapagos National Park Directorate, and a straight political support from up top. It required interinstitutional cooperation from all the institutions in Galapagos and outside Galapagos, with a multi-interdisciplinary team of scientists from the natural and social scientists, mathematics, statistical people. And I managed to get a team and the support from WWF, World Wildlife Fund, from the University of San Francisco de Quito, and North Carolina, University of Chapel Hill, University of Cuenca, and many other institutions, CDF, Charles Foundation, because we required lots of information and data. And we managed to get data 30 years on the most, you name it, sewage, population growth, health, labor, transportation, energy consumption, and so on and so forth. Introduced species, ecosystems, information, etc. So we used, the team used a system thinking approach to develop scenarios, modeling on what are those scenarios that could be shown and help for sustainability, and also identifying limits that it was called the point of no return, identifying those points of no return. So we need to find out the current situation of the island with all that information. And then we can see in this diagram the yellow curve is the tourists. Since 1972, That was until 2010, the information we gathered. The study was carried out in 2013, but I managed to update a little bit, 75,000 tourists in 2018. And that curve of tourists, the yellow one, really behaves similar to the one related with the local population there. So they go almost parallel. And of course that increase also relates to the increase of invasive species, which is the red line. I'm colorblind, I think I'm reading the
green.
Is that green?
It's a light green.
Yeah. Light green, okay, thank you very much. So the light green, for those that are watching this live streaming, is the green one. And then, of course, the other small one, but very pronounced one, is the demand for energy, in this case, fossil fuels, in that period of time. Another of the interesting findings was the information about the number of tourists and where they were going to. And since 2009, we found out that Galapagos was receiving more tourists that were using the towns as the base to develop their activities than the usual model, which is and still is just getting your package, getting your tour on a floating hotel, on a boat, and visiting town, any of the towns once a week. So since 2019, the locally based tourism started growing. And even nowadays, this is the tendency. So it has been a stable number here, but increasing. And can you imagine then, this one putting the pressure on the municipalities, and the growth is continuing. So with this, then, in the middle of the diagram, for those that are watching us live, the very close relationship is between the tourists and local residents. The more tourists, the more local residents, the more pressure, the more need for provision of services are there. So with all the information that we gathered of 30 years, there was a hard work of the team to identify those variables for sustainability that had the most robust information throughout the years that could be placed into the modeling system. Working, trying to adjust, gaps of information using mathematics and algorithms and so on. So we identify these as the main ones, and of course, if you have a look at any of these, they would be within the social realm of the system, of the social ecosystem, or it would be within the natural realm of the social ecological system. So with all that vital information and identifying those indicators, then the complexity of finding the relationship between them and what effect would each of those would have on the other one, work on the causal loops of the modeling. And this is just a tiny bit. I'm not going to explain the whole thing. This is just to show you the complexity of the work that the team and the institutions had to deal with. So with all that info and the link between those elements, 3 scenarios were proposed in order to show the dynamics of the social ecosystem of Galapagos. And those 3 scenarios are linked with exponential growth of tourists or tourism, which is the first one here, the one that goes, can you help me with the color?
It's red.
Yeah. Red, thank you. And for those out there, the red color. So the red color shows the exponential, and actually it's the tendency that is happening nowadays. We did have the break of 2019, the COVID 2019 in 2020, but we are back again into reaching the same amount where it was left out before COVID-19. So it's an exponential growth. Then the other scenario is, what about if we moderate the influx of tourists to a 3.8% annually? Because this one was going at 6%, and in some years were 11, 12%. A tremendous growth. And the other one is just stabilizing the number of tourists when the study started. So have the projections there at that pace. By 2032, 20 years later, we would have this business as usual, 900,000 tourists. Then reducing the influx would be over 300,000 and just around 200,000 if a stabilization would have taken place. Now, we knew that the curves with the local population are similar. So there you go, the similar behavior of the curves with a projection of population growth at the pace of geometrical growth of tourism. We could reach in 2032 just about 110,000 inhabitants. Then the other one, the intermediate one, would probably reach just over 40,000 inhabitants, and the other one just over 30,000, reaching 40,000 as a normal birth rate if the tourism growth is just stabilized. Now, of 100 and more parameters studied, I'm going to show you just a few of them and what is the impact of the different 3-year scenarios on some of these parameters. So what is the impact of geometric growth and moderate growth of tourism and a stabilization model or into these ones right here, into these parameters. So the land occupancy, when we go to the first one, land occupancy, at the time of the study, by 2022, we would have reached 100% of land occupancy on the islands. And even though we had the break of COVID 2019, I think we're probably almost reaching that stage now. And with the moderate, just visualizing reaching that 90% in 2033. When we go to saturation of visitor sites, by the time of the study and being a director of the national park, I knew that we had just reached some of the visitor sites near the towns already to be in a saturated stage. So this is what the projections of the study shows. By 2017, we've reached already, and by 2020. In fact, as we speak, the Galapagos National Park is already working on the extension of more or current and or more visitor sites near the towns, because the overwhelming arrival of tourists to the sites it's impressive. The reaching ecological point of no return, which is related to the invasive species altering the natural ecosystems in the geometric growth. I mean, more tourists, more influx of goods and services. And we have the years there by 2026, if business as usual, if nothing was done, reach some of them, particularly those ones related with ecosystems near or on inhabited islands, would reach the point of no return. And the last one, the destabilization by 2033, if nothing is done in some of the inhabited islands. The other figures were related to the numbers of production of waste and energy that will be projected in the different scenarios. So the recommendations of the study would be, or where the stabilization of number of tourists by 2017. I mean, we've reached 270,000 tourists already, limiting the flight frequencies to the islands and increase the entrance fee to the park. Limiting the flight frequencies until these days have not been considered properly, at least increase entrance to the fee. Various studies have been made. A willingness to pay exercise, a couple of them shows that tourists are eager to pay up to $360 to enter the park, but if there's some investment in improving the services for those tourist activity. So the other recommendation is investing in services like transport, better services at restaurants, hotels, internet, and so on. Strict and improved quarantine capacities. The Galapagos Biosecurity Agency is struggling to really cope with the pressure of the cargo that arrives to the islands. The dock in Guayaquil, we've been fighting 30 years. Now there is money coming in for conservation, and there's still no political decision to build the dock for the Galapagos, which has already a property just about 6 years ago, with the proper infrastructure for a proper inspection of all the goods that are put on the ships that are going to the Galapagos Islands. Improve the budget for the Galapagos National Park Directorate. The Marine Reserve is very extensive. Now there's another area that is put on the shoulders of the Galapagos National Park Directorate, is that the Marine Reserve Hermandad Brotherhood that connects with Marine Reserve and Cocos Island up in the north in Costa Rica. Science and education, we talked about that, and the need to reinforce the funding to generate information for the social ecological systems, capacities of municipalities to really implement and plan and have a good direction of how the cities or the small towns cope with the increase of tourism and provide with the good services, education, health, electricity to the local people. Reduce the use of fossil fuels and improve mobility. And another recommendation is generate capacity to assess and monitor the behavior of Galapagos. This exercise here did leave behind the tool and the exercise where the institutions were to contribute to raise the information, to accumulate the data that could be put into this system and have an opportunity to show the decision makers the best ways to go on the sustainability of Galapagos. And last but not least, the community needs to be informed, and the community needs to be participating strongly in the decisions, because the top-down approach has mainly been part of the development of Galapagos. You know, taking advantage of democracy, you are elected and they do whatever they like, but the spaces for participation, they are very poor. They are just starting, and this is something that I will show that to you. So my own reading about the situation is that sustainable development or sustainability is unstable. You know, those three pillars are not the same size. The economic development, the interests of tourism are dominating. You know, stumbling the environmental protection, leaving as the second one where the concept is being put attention to, but the social aspect of Galapagos being left behind. I know that it's important to fight for the environment because it's what supports all living human livings on the islands, but the social development is very poor and needs attention. Not to say the governance, which is required as an element of sustainability. Every 2 years we have elections. Would you believe that? So every 4 years, president and congress people, and every intermediate years we have elections of city councils and mayors. So, some evidence that we have made some progress. The social ecological system concept has been inserted into the regional planning, and the regional planning had already inserted the United Nations development goals, and the current plan has 5 axes, which is governance, habitat, economy, community, and environment. And lately as well, in order to help support the importance of implementing the plan and the SDGs, Galapagos Hub was created and approved by the Galapagos Government Council, where an external group of universities and research institutions would provide with support on sustainability, innovations, and resilience. And hopefully we can call the attention of Stanford with the new School for Sustainability to consider being part of this Galapagos Hub. Now, the participation of the communities is incipient, but there are spaces out there, it needs to be reinforced. It's happening, but it requires much more political decision, but also requires the push from the bottom, from the local either citizens or groups in the community. But they have a place in the Galapagos Planning Assembly. They have also participated in identifying the milestones and indicators that are in the implementation of the plan for Galapagos 2030, and recently as well funded by the international community, European Union particularly. There are some interesting projects that are being held and developed at the moment with the initiatives that depart from the community. And I make a parenthesis here. On Wednesday next week, my class will be listening directly from Galapagos, the key actors that are involved in this last effort. So a few recommendations after COVID 2019. We need to diversify the economy of the islands for better resilience. Putting the eggs in just one basket, like tourism, we're going to suffer if another of these external factors like a pandemic strikes us again. We need to articulate land-based tourism, the ones that arrive to the towns, with the ones that are regulated by the national park. You know, those two models need to get closer together if we are to diminish the pressure on the ecosystems and the social systems too. The municipalities, they need to work together. They must get together, even though they do it at the Galapagos Government Council, they tend to take individual actions, and there's lots of opportunities if they would work together. Not to let business as usual take over again. We shouldn't go back to what it was before 2019. We need to act, we need to be innovative, and we need to be persistent in having different ways in order to achieve sustainability. And last but not least, reinforce the community participation and decision making based on scientific and technical information, which is out there. We've shown that this study comes from 2013, 2014, and very little has been done. So there is a need to push that from the bottom up and use the scientific and technical information.